why isn't this on a loop for most Americans? And why are we so disconnected from this thing called poverty? And why is this $15 such a hard thing to get past? I mean, it seems like $15 is the least we can do, a minimum wage.
It's despicable. It's outrageous. One of the things that I think that we often don't appreciate is that this the current $7.25 per hour wage translates only to only $15,000 a year. Yet the federal poverty measure says that for one individual, a household with one individual, you are at poverty if you make less than $12,800. If you are a family of four, let's say you're 2 adults and 2 children, or you're 1 adult and 3 children, the federal poverty measure is $26,500. The reason why I bring that up is because we know right now that the minimum wage is not enough. We know that that federal poverty measure is discounted, is undercounting people who are struggling every single day. And this nation's problem is that they don't want to raise that minimum wage, because then they have to admit that that people have been languishing in poverty at greater numbers than they want to own up to. You get what I'm saying? What I'm trying to help people appreciate is that when you raise that wage, $15 translates to $30,000 a year. We already know that the federal poverty measure, which says who is poor and who is not, for a family of 4 is at $26,500. So if I take that wage up to $30,000, what it's suggesting to everybody is that I'm already discounting people who are struggling. If I raise that number up, then I'm admitting that I've been keeping people at this poverty level, which is a falsehood. There's something called the Self-Sufficiency Standard that is gaining traction in certain places. When you look at self-sufficiency, what it calculates is the cost to live, housing, transportation, food, childcare, incidental medical costs. If you look at, let's just take New York. If you look at New York and you look at the Bronx, which has, more lower income people, it says that to actually make ends meet, it costs somebody about $51,000 a year for a family with 1 adult and 1 child. So now take that. $51,000 is about $26 per hour. But if the federal government keeps it at $7.25, it's not owning what it really costs to make ends meet. And what it's saying to the nation is $7.25 is good enough, when they really know that it isn't. If you raise it up, now you have to start looking at all of the gaps in housing subsidies, in food support subsidies, in childcare. So it's to their advantage to keep discounting what it costs to really make ends meet. And the way you do that is by saying that the wages are enough. You get what I'm saying?
No, I do, but I'm my heart hurts because it seems like people rather play these actuary games, these economic games, and not look at the humanity of a thing. When FDR did the New Deal, it was groundbreaking, right?
Right.
And it wasn't looked at as welfare for white people. It was looked at as, a handout. It was looked at as fair because people couldn't make ends meet and folks couldn't feed their family. And this is America. And that's the dignity that is expected in this country. So the government must make up the difference. And that was fine, except it excluded people who worked on farms, Black folk, and excluded people who worked in homes, domestic workers, Black folk, until the 1970s, right? The GI Bill, the things that we, so, I mean, historically.
Which also excluded us.
No, I know. I was going to say, historically, all of these handouts, these government programs to give people a leg up, to give people dignity, to give people a way into middle class, self-sufficiency, we were excluded. We had a conversation about reparations at the top of the hour because Evanston, Illinois is doing a pilot program for, in my opinion, a pilot program or blueprint for what reparations could look like. Using the marijuana tax, the tax on now newly legalized marijuana, 3% of which would go towards reparations. I think that's a good model. It's a small community. It's a small liberal community of people who actually seem to care about folk, even if the majority of people there are not Black. How do we get that? Because I think as soon as you start talking about everything from Coca-Cola having cocaine, and it's, that pushed, a whole movement around Black people's access to this drug,
Right.
to a minimum wage, to any other kind of program. There's always this backlash because there's this notion that somehow Black people are going to benefit or brown people are going to benefit. So therefore, we're going to just eliminate it all, when the truth is there are more poor white people in this country suffering.
Yeah, yeah. But part of the problem is, you and I think maybe have touched upon this before. What this country has done so well is to put racism kind of as the foundation and the primer, right? And so everything is looked at through that lens and that frame, such that even though you have the great majority of people who are poor in this country being white Americans, and let's just qualify that and help people understand, in numbers, more white people are poor. But when we talk about poverty and Black persons and persons of Hispanic descent, we are disproportionately represented in poverty. So there are less of us who are actually poor, but it's a greater percentage of us who are poor. What this country has done so well by infusing racism into this whole dynamic is it's kept Black people from joining up, well, I should say white people from joining up with Black people. That's what Reverend Barber is actually trying to do. He's trying to bring us all together to say, we're all in this. White people are suffering too. Let's disregard this notion of Black, white, Hispanic, and other, and see that we're all suffering and struggling. But what this country has done it so well for now, better than 400 years, that what then happens is they put on the welfare face, they put on the poverty, on the ads, the pamphlets, or whatever, the Black face that makes you think that this is just about Black and brown people. So even though white people are suffering, they then get to turn and say, it's because of Black people I'm not where I am, rather than it's the government that's keeping us all down. And I think that, for me, the wage is critically important, but even the $15 minimum wage isn't going to get you where you need to be. Right. I think that what we have to do is we have to blow up. We have to debunk this lie about, like poverty in America. The fact of the matter is that when Reverend Barber talks, and he talks about people who are struggling, the fact of the matter is that this great nation has better than 40% of its people struggling on a day-to-day basis to make ends meet. America doesn't want the world to know that. We don't want the world to know that this first world country, that wants to be first at everything, has better than 40% of the people struggling. So they're going to minimize it.
One could argue we've always upheld the mythology from the very beginning. So I'm glad, and as you're talking, I'm also, in my mind is swirling personal responsibility. While the government should do what it's supposed to do to make sure that it forms a bridge for people to never fall into the cracks, I believe the community has to not depend on the government at the same time, because the government has always got strings attached to any program that involves us. There's always a but clause, whether we're talking about the 13th Amendment or what have you. So I'm thinking that the strategy needs to shift for us. Yes, we got to put the political pressure on for reparations, for all of this, for minimum wage raises. But at the exact same time, I had Tiffany Aliche on this week, and she said, we have to learn to earn. Right. We have to learn. There are so many industries that depend on our labor anyway, on our genius anyway. We need to start to lean into commodifying the things that we do naturally to make other people billionaires and trillionaires.
Well, a good example is, that's why there's so much interest by many of us in entrepreneurship and in development of businesses within our communities, in part to keep the dollars in our communities, right? Because, in some communities, the dollar rarely leaves, or it goes it exchanges hands multiple times before it actually leaves. You take communities where there's a high representation of Asian persons, and they have their restaurants and they have their various businesses. That dollar changes hands several times within the community before it actually leaves. But in the Black community, We don't have an abundance of our own like insurance, like businesses. We don't have an abundance of restaurants other than, fast food. We don't have an abundance of like services, like, dry cleaners, whatever the case may be, even our own schools. So, we go out of our community to work. We then do our grocery shopping sometimes outside of the community. We do our dry cleaning outside of the community, whatever other services, and then we come back in. Maybe the exchange happens a lot of times in our nail salons and sometimes that's not even the case because the nail salons aren't being operated by people of color, Black people of color, right? But maybe it exchanges in the barbershops and in the other hair salons. We don't keep our money in our community, which allows people to stay employed. But the other thing is that because we don't have these businesses, we then aren't like investing in each other and growing our incomes. There's been a lot of push for entrepreneurship, a lot of push for worker cooperatives, which are like service businesses. They may be, cleaning businesses, landscaping businesses, childcare businesses, where it's a cooperative and you're your own boss and you're actually, giving yourself greater wages than when you go outside the community. So we need to be doing more of that. But the other thing that I want to challenge us on is to appreciate that even when we are learning and we're getting an education, the way this system is currently structured and set up, we're still not earning our fair share. We don't hear enough and we don't advocate enough for equity in wages. The fact that Black women with a master's degree are just beginning to earn as much on average as a white man with just a high school degree only. That's a problem. That's a real problem. But there's not enough push in government around wage equity, race equity, and wage equity. So sometimes we're educating ourselves, but we're not earning the same.
And I was going to say how much of that is on us, because sometimes, they say the saying, closed mouth doesn't get fed. I think a lot of times we are afraid to, I was just talking to somebody who could have gotten paid a whole lot more money had they asked 1.5 years earlier. They didn't ask. And they were like, I let 1.5 years go by, and that's more money that could have been in my pocket, more 401k money, more matching money. And 1.5 years is a big gap, and I think we are conditioned to not rock the boat. We're afraid, of, knowing our value. And quite frankly, it's expected for a white man to advocate for himself. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But when Black people show up with the same expectation, they're not usually met with the appreciation, that a white man is. So, I mean, we have a lot of things to navigate, but we have to do it all. And it's exhausting.
And we have to get out there. We have to get out there and we just have to try it. I mean, I personally have my own stories of, being a lawyer, having a graduate degree in management and policy, and, and sitting across the table from white men trying to tell me what my worth is. And, and me saying, no, that's not what my worth is. My worth is more, and going head to head with them. And them having to appreciate, I'm not playing these games. And then I get labeled aggressive, right? I get labeled as, I get labeled as, are you here for the money or are you here for the work? Like, you kind of sound like you're really concerned about the money. Yeah, I think it's fair to be paid my worth. So it's at all, I guess what I'm saying is that it's a journey that we all have to go through, but we also have to back it up. And there's the work that we need to be doing to advocate. I just want to quickly say, wages are so critically important, but the challenge that what we have to remember is that the $15 minimum wage is the first, is kind of like the first step. And it is that, I'm going to put out, it's a damn shame that they're not trying to push this through, because it becomes all the more difficult if they can't get it through with reconciliation, which allows for just 51 votes. It's not going to happen otherwise. And reconciliation bills really don't come up like every other day. So it's a real problem. We're not going to see it.
What can we do? What can we do? What can the folk who are listening do to make that a reality? Is there pressure? Is there a pressure point somewhere? Is there a bombardment of calls or emails or texts or tweets?
So it does begin with the writing. It does begin with the writing and holding President Biden accountable. He ain't getting this through any other kind of way. So it is the writing, it is the calling, it's, letting them and the senators that are there know that, this is not going to be forgotten. Letting them know you may not be like voting in another Republican, but maybe you'll put in there another Democrat who will get the job done. So we have to hold them accountable. We have to demonstrate our weight and our leverage. But the other thing that I think that we have to do is educate ourselves. Like there's something called, and I spoke about before, the self-sufficiency calculator. If you just Google self-sufficiency calculator, you can look at it also through the self-sufficiency standard. What it helps you to appreciate is what it really costs to live in states and localities around this country, which then better equips you when you are pushing and saying 725 is not enough, to be able to help people understand, no, if I'm going to pay for my housing, my transportation, my child care, my incidental medical costs, it costs me a lot more than this amount, and you just can't get over on me in trying to put something forth telling me that this is enough.
I love how consistent you are in the paint with this, Jennifer Jones Austin.